Stepmom attacked my kid over a wedding roll, so I did the one thing. Before we dive in, Reddit Pearls needs your help. The channel is struggling, and every like and sub makes a huge difference. I appreciate you sticking around. Now, let's jump into the story. Hey there. Some stories sit with you for a long time before you're finally ready to tell them, and this one has taken years to put into words. My name is Travis. I grew up with a dad who remarried when I was still young. His new wife, Valerie, came into our lives with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes and an unspoken need to control everything around her. From the start, she treated family events like stage productions. Every birthday, holiday, and backyard meal had to revolve around her, as though she were directing a play. My dad said she just wanted to feel included. We let it go for years, but Valerie never knew how to share space. And the more time passed, the more she pulled attention, decisions, and authority toward herself. She needed things done her way, or not at all. I saw it, my siblings saw it, but my dad always defended her until defending her meant losing the rest of us. When I got engaged to my fiancée, Harper, Valerie immediately began pushing boundaries. It was subtle at first, questions disguised as suggestions, helpful comments about the guest list, and passive-aggressive critiques of our choices. But it quickly turned into outright interference. She showed up uninvited to Harper's dress appointment, called vendors behind our backs, and even tried to convince my dad to have us change the wedding date because it clashed with her vacation. Harper and I stayed firm. We didn't want to hurt anyone, but we weren't going to let someone else hijack the day we'd waited so long for. My dad urged us to let Valerie feel involved, but after years of tiptoeing around her ego, we said no. Shortly after, everything in our lives changed. Harper's younger half-brother, Noah, came to live with us after a tragedy in her family. Around the same time, we found out Harper was pregnant. Suddenly, we weren't just planning a wedding. We were building a home, one that included Noah and our future child. I moved in with them during the pandemic, and what we built together felt real. Unplanned, maybe, but deeply rooted. Valerie hated it. She never accepted Noah as family. She said Harper was trying to trap me with a child and accused her of manipulating our family for sympathy. When our son, Jonah, was born, Valerie barely acknowledged it. She referred to Noah as a temporary houseguest and never once treated him with kindness. My father avoided confrontation, saying he loved the kids, but he never defended them when it counted. One weekend, with our usual babysitters unavailable, my dad offered to watch the boys. It felt risky, but he assured us he'd come alone. He didn't. When we returned, we walked into chaos. Noah was sobbing, holding a tissue to his face. Jonah was crying in the other room. Valerie was mid-rant, pacing and yelling. My dad stood there, frozen. We learned that Noah had mentioned he and Jonah would both be ring bearers at our wedding. Valerie snapped. She told him he wasn't part of our family and shouldn't pretend to be. She screamed, he cried, and then she hit him. We rushed Noah to the doctor and reported everything. We had nanny cam footage showing the verbal abuse in the aftermath, Noah's tears, her rage, and my dad standing in the middle of it all, doing nothing. The next day, we filed charges. Child endangerment, physical harm, verbal abuse. We got a restraining order. Valerie was cut off permanently. My dad chose to defend her. Said we were overreacting. And just like that, we lost him too. We were done. Banned her from the wedding, from our home, from our lives. And while it wasn't easy, we knew it was the only choice that protected our family. The fallout was just beginning. And so was the rest of the story. After the charges were filed, things shifted quickly. Valerie's name was now tied to a formal report, and that changed the tone in the family. Some relatives reached out in quiet support. Others didn't respond at all. The silence told us exactly where everyone stood. And it was clear not everyone believed us. My dad didn't call for a few days, but when he finally did, it wasn't to apologize. He told me I had gone too far, that it wasn't as bad as we were making it out to be. He claimed we were tearing the family apart over a misunderstanding. I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. We made it clear to our wedding planner. Valerie was not to be involved in anything, and security would be briefed. It wasn't just about keeping her away from us. It was about protecting the kids. After what she did to Noah, we couldn't take any more chances. Harper's family stepped up in ways we didn't expect. Her aunt helped organize child care for the rehearsal week. Her cousin stepped in to handle vendor communication. And Harper's grandmother sent a letter that made both of us cry, just a few words about how proud she was of the strength we were showing. Through all of this, Noah stayed quiet. He didn't talk about what happened unless we brought it up. But he started having trouble sleeping, waking up in the middle of the night from nightmares. We found a child therapist who specialized in trauma, and we got him in weekly. Slowly, his trust started to return. Jonah, too, was unsettled. He couldn't understand what happened, but he picked up on the tension. It showed in how he clung to us, how he cried when we left the room. We focused on rebuilding our home. Stability became the goal, routine meals, school drop-offs, simple weekends at the park. Every small victory felt earned. And in the background, Valerie was fighting to dismiss the charges. She claimed it was a misunderstanding, tried to frame Noah's injury as an accident, and accused us of using him as a pawn. But the evidence was there. The pediatrician's report, the camera footage, and Noah's testimony all pointed in one direction. The process was long, but it was moving. Then my dad showed up at our door unannounced. He stood there, looking like he hadn't slept in days, asking to speak to me. Harper didn't say a word, just picked up the boys and walked them upstairs. I stepped outside. He said he missed us, said he wanted to fix things. But the apology never came. He danced around it, blaming stress, the pandemic, anything but Valerie. I told him we couldn't be part of his life if he couldn't see what she'd done. He didn't respond. Update. That was the last time I saw him in person. I had to accept that this was our new reality. A smaller family, maybe, but a safer one. And we still had a wedding to finish planning. What came next was nothing short of chaos, but not in the way we expected. Planning the wedding without my father was hard, but dealing with the rest of the family was something else entirely. Word of the charges had spread. Not all of it was accurate, of course. A few extended relatives were convinced we had exaggerated everything to cut Valerie out of the picture. Others quietly supported us, but didn't want to get involved. We stuck to our plan. Valerie's name was handed to venue security and vendors with a firm note. Under no circumstances was she to be allowed in. That included the rehearsal dinner, ceremony, and reception. Every inch of our day was going to be safe, especially for Noah and Jonah. And while most vendors respected our requests, there were a few awkward phone calls. Are you sure you don't want to reconsider? As if the situation could be patched up with a polite RSVP. Harper and I leaned heavily on her side of the family. Her aunt acted like a coordinator, her cousins organized transportation for out-of-town guests, and her mom made it her mission to help us keep things on track emotionally. We didn't have many big blow-ups. What we did have was exhaustion, the kind that builds up slowly when you're constantly defending the truth. Noah was still quiet. The therapy helped, but he remained cautious, even around extended family he'd known for years. Jonah, on the other hand, was too young to process it all, but he sensed things. He clung to Harper more than usual and got upset when we weren't within arm's reach. The wedding itself felt like a finish line. A quiet, long-awaited moment where we could finally shift from holding everything together to just living again. We got married on a breezy Saturday afternoon in a small botanical garden. The ceremony was small, intimate. Noah walked down the aisle holding Jonah's hand. People cried, but not because of sadness, because the moment finally felt right. The reception was joyful, warm, and simple. We didn't do any grand spectacles, no dance floor drama, no big announcements. It was just us, our boys, and the people who had chosen to stand beside us when things got hard. And then she showed up. Valerie. Despite the legal order, despite the venue security, she managed to slip in through the catering entrance. We didn't even notice until halfway through dinner. One of the vendors whispered something to our coordinator, and before I could even turn around, I saw her standing off to the side in a pale blue dress, clutching a gift bag like that somehow made it okay. Security reacted fast. She was calmly but firmly escorted out, protesting in her usual dramatic way, loudly asking why she couldn't be there for her stepson's big day. It was surreal. Guests turned, some whispering, others just watching. Noah froze. Jonah started to cry. We moved the boys out of the room for a few minutes. Harper stayed with them while I made sure Valerie was gone. She didn't resist once she saw me, just gave me this look like I was the one who had failed her. Later, one of our relatives approached me to say it had been cruel to exclude her, that no matter what happened, she was still part of the family. I didn't say much in response. I didn't need to, because by then, I had stopped caring about who approved of our choices. The only people I needed in my life were the ones who protected what mattered most. And Valerie had never done that. Not once. The rest of the night went by in a haze. There was laughter, dancing, and even a few stories from Harper's family that had everyone tearing up with laughter. But the image of Valerie standing there, trying to insert herself again, never left me. It was the final confirmation of something I'd felt for years. She didn't care about being family. She only cared about control. And she had just lost all of it. In the weeks following the wedding, we focused on reclaiming some sense of normalcy. The ceremony had gone ahead despite the drama, and we were proud of that. But it didn't end there. Valerie's brief appearance had stirred up the dust again. Messages poured in, some supportive, others laced with guilt-tripping language from relatives who still hadn't processed what had really happened. We blocked out the noise and focused on our family. Harper and I spent our first month of marriage in a quiet rhythm. Early mornings with the kids, afternoon walks, and weekend errands. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. We took the boys apple picking one Saturday, and watching Noah lift Jonah up to grab a branch felt like a glimpse into something better, something healing. But Valerie wasn't done. She filed a countersuit, claiming emotional distress and defamation. It was a legal move we half expected, designed less to win and more to rattle us. Our lawyer wasn't fazed. The case against her was still pending, and the evidence we'd compiled spoke volumes. The countersuit dragged us back into the courtroom. I had to revisit the incident over and over again. Testimonies, photos, the security report from the wedding, witness statements. Valerie had somehow convinced herself she could spin this into a redemption arc. The process stretched into months. Every delay, every motion, felt like a reminder of the damage she'd done and how far she was willing to go to protect her image. Harper remained steady, but I could see it wearing on her, too. We took turns attending hearings while the other stayed home with the boys. Noah asked fewer questions than I expected, but every once in a while, he'd check the locks on the doors before bed or ask if we had to see her again. Those moments cut deep. I knew it would take time for him to unlearn that kind of fear. Jonah was growing fast, unaware of the tension, but his presence brought light to our lives, reminding us what we were fighting for. By the time spring arrived, we got our first real break. A judge ruled in our favor. Valerie's countersuit was thrown out. The initial child endangerment case hadn't concluded yet, but the dismissal of her attempt to flip the narrative gave us breathing room. For the first time in months, Harper and I let ourselves exhale. We decided to take a short weekend trip, just the four of us. A cabin near the lake, no phone service, no screens. It wasn't about escaping, it was about reconnecting. We grilled hot dogs, went on hikes, and let the boys chase each other around until sunset. It was one of the first times in ages when everything felt still. On the last night there, we made esmores by the fire. Noah leaned against my shoulder and whispered, "It feels different now." I didn't ask what he meant. I knew. It was safety. It was calm. It was the absence of her voice in our lives. That was the moment I realized we were finally moving forward, not away from the damage, but towards something better. After returning from the cabin, something shifted in all of us. We were still dealing with court dates and cautious routines, but the fear had faded from our daily life. Harper and I started talking more about the future, not just surviving what had happened, but actually looking ahead. Noah had found a new rhythm, too. His therapy sessions became more upbeat, his drawings brighter. He started sleeping through the night again. Jonah, ever the energetic little shadow, followed his brother everywhere. Their bond had become its own kind of healing, something no court or custody paper could manufacture. But the situation with Valerie wasn't over. The main case, child endangerment, was still active. Her lawyers tried every delay tactic in the book. They filed motions, asked for extensions, questioned the legitimacy of the nanny cam footage, and even tried to discredit the pediatrician's report. But it didn't work. The court wasn't swayed. The evidence was too consistent, too detailed. We just had to hold on through the slow grind of the process. Meanwhile, my dad remained silent. He never reached out again after our last doorstep conversation. I had moments where I thought about calling him, especially when court days were hard, but every time, I remembered his silence in the worst moment. That had been louder than anything he could have said. Some relatives continued to pretend like everything was normal. We received holiday cards with Valerie's name on them, invites to birthdays where she would be present, and awkward group texts that carefully ignored everything that had happened. We didn't attend any of them. Instead, we built our own holidays, our own birthdays, our own routines. Jonah took his first steps in the middle of our living room with Harper clapping on the floor and Noah filming on my phone. We watched it back a dozen times, laughing as Jonah lost balance and collapsed onto a pile of pillows. There was joy in that moment, untouched by past noise. Spring became summer, and the trial date finally arrived. We weren't required to testify, but we chose to be there. We sat quietly, watching as Valerie's defense unraveled. Her voice on the nanny cam. Noah's statement, read by a child advocate. The pediatrician's records. It all stacked up into a reality she couldn't spin. Her expressions shifted with each passing hour, from smug defiance to carefully concealed panic. The verdict came 2 days later. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing would be addressed separately, but the charge stood. We didn't celebrate with champagne or high fives. We just sat together that night, the four of us on the couch, and watched cartoons while eating popcorn. It was over. At least that chapter was. And while I didn't know what would come next, I finally felt like we had space to breathe. The days after the verdict passed quietly, almost too quietly. There was no dramatic ending, no grand sense of closure. Just calm. The absence of tension, of waiting, of preparing for the next intrusion. For the first time in a long while, the silence didn't feel threatening. Harper and I kept to our routines. Early mornings, work, and walks with the boys. We adjusted slowly, cautiously, like people recovering from a storm and still checking the sky. But life didn't rush us. It lets us ease back into normal. Jonah was starting to talk more, and his favorite word had become go. Every time we picked up the keys or put on our shoes, he'd shout it. We took weekend drives to nowhere in particular, just to be out. Noah always packed snacks and acted like the co-pilot, pointing out landmarks or silly-looking signs. These moments had nothing to do with court or family drama. They were just us, rebuilding, living. Then came the sentencing. Valerie was given a suspended sentence with mandatory anger management and was banned from any unsupervised contact with minors. She was placed under a court-monitored restriction from approaching Noah or Jonah until further review. It wasn't the harshest outcome, but it gave us what we needed: distance. My dad didn't attend the sentencing. We heard he'd moved out temporarily, staying with one of his brothers. That news came from a cousin who had quietly stayed in touch. No one knew whether it meant regret or just avoiding backlash. Around that time, Noah brought home a school project, a simple poster about his family. I braced myself when I saw it, unsure of what I'd find. But it was just the four of us, drawn in his uneven handwriting. My mom Harper, my brother Jonah, and Travis. No labels, no step, no half, no extras. Just us. That moment sat with me for days. Not because it erased what we'd been through, but because it confirmed that we were building something real, stronger than what had been broken. We planned a weekend getaway again, this time to the coast. Harper booked a small rental with a view of the water. Jonah tried to eat sand. Noah found seashells and insisted on bringing them all home. At night, we sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, listening to waves while the boys slept. That evening, Harper asked me if I thought Valerie would try to come back. I said I didn't know. But even if she did, the difference now was that we weren't afraid of her. She had already lost. She lost access. She lost credibility. And more than that, she lost the version of the family she tried to shape in her image. We weren't hiding anymore. We were just living, loud, messy, imperfect, and completely on our own terms. Months passed, quietly, steadily, and for once, without disruption. Valerie faded from conversation. The occasional update trickled in from distant relatives. She had moved in with a friend, started attending counseling sessions, tried to mend things with some parts of the family. But for us, she no longer existed. Not in our home, not in our plans, not in our future. My dad never reached out again. Not a call, not a letter, not even a forwarded message through someone else. That silence said more than anything he could have explained. And while there were moments where I wondered if it hurt him to stay away, I stopped letting that thought linger. Because our lives had finally grown past that chapter. Noah started calling me Dad. It happened out of nowhere. He was showing Jonah how to tie his shoes and said, "Ask Dad. He's better at knots." I didn't react right away. I think I just stood there for a second, not wanting to draw attention to it. But inside, everything shifted. It wasn't about the title. It was about what it meant. We'd created something honest. Something that didn't require permission or approval from anyone who tried to tear it down. Our little family, built on resilience and care, had filled every gap Valerie had left behind. Harper and I started looking for a bigger place. Not because we had to, but because we were ready. Ready for new routines, new memories, and maybe even one day, another little voice added to the mix. Update. It's been a year now. Valerie hasn't tried to reach out. The restraining order is still in place. My father remains silent. And we're still here, stronger, closer, and more rooted than ever. Noah's doing better than we ever imagined. He's got friends, hobbies, and a steadiness we once feared he'd never find. Jonah is talking in full sentences now, often rambling about bugs, trucks, or whatever cartoon he's fixated on that week. Harper's thriving too. She started sharing parts of our journey with support groups, offering quiet guidance to people navigating similar storms. And me? I've stopped waiting for the past to fix itself. Sometimes peace isn't found in resolution. Sometimes it's in choosing not to carry what others refuse to fix. We didn't just survive her. We outgrew her. And that, in the end, was the quietest kind of revenge of all.